Now, listening back to this piece, the levels are a bit all over the place. While we've been writing this piece, we've also been making some slight level adjustments. But now, let's hone in on this and get the levels right. So in this video, I want to show you how I work through getting my track ready for mixing. What I like to do is sort out the levels and add in some automation before getting into any effect processing. So for this demonstration, let's start at the top of the instruments and work our way down, and you'll get an idea of how to correct the levels in a mix on an epic cinematic orchestration. So let's first start off with the strings section. And what you'll notice is that I've put the different sections into folders. So the strings are in their own folder. So is the brass, the winds, and so on. And on this folder track, I have volume parameters. So I can adjust the overall volume of these instruments with this fader. So if I want the whole string section to come down maybe 3 dB, I can just easily do that with this volume fader on the folder track. So let's go through the strings. Let's solo the strings and start off with the first violins. So I'll mute the rest of these and just set up a loop point to go through. Now with these violins, they can come down a bit. They don't need to be so prominent. So let's give ourselves some headroom and pull these down to about 4 dB. Then onto the second violins, the same thing. They can also come down slightly to also about 4 dB. Now with the violas, it's actually okay for them sitting there at 0 dB. Then on to the cellos. Now maybe these can come down quite a bit. Currently they're sitting at 4 dB, let's drag them down to about 6 dB. So just checking the levels against each other. And then with the basses, these can maybe also drop slightly. I've got it at 0 dB, let's maybe drop this down, maybe it's about 2 dB. So as you can see, I'm mainly dropping the level of instruments. By dropping this level, I'm just giving myself some extra headroom that's going to help in the end when I get through to the mixing and mastering of the track. Now, let's just take a listen to the strings again. And maybe overall, these strings could come down 2 dB as well. And I haven't done any panning on these tracks. If you actually open up the mixer and see, there isn't any panning on them. And that's because these instruments are using the room mic of the instrument that really has the panning or the seating of that instrument in the orchestra set correctly. If you're using dry instruments or instruments using the close mic, then you may want to apply some panning. It's quite good to follow the default panning set out by a real orchestra with your orchestral instruments. You can use this chart as a guide. It shows you where each instrument should relatively be placed in an orchestra seating. So follow these guidelines. It really helps place the orchestral instruments correctly. Now next, let's check out the brass. We'll solo these. And let's first start off with the 2 horns. Just get that pickup. I think that's sitting fine. You can maybe just drop it slightly. Then onto the 6 horns. Whoops, I forgot that was looping. So let's go back again. This can also drop slightly. And it's here how the 12 horns come in. Over here. And you can see I've faded out that last sustain note that's on those instruments. And the last bit of the brass are the trumpets and the trombones. And these trumpets can be pretty loud, especially when played like this. So let's also drop them maybe to about 6 dB. And then the trombones. And let's pull it slightly down as well to maybe about 6 dB. Cool, so that covers the brass. Now let's move on to the woodwinds. Just going to jump straight for that area where they are, which is right over here. So you'll hear that was actually pretty soft. Then the trills. So what you would have noticed here is that there is a volume difference between the different articulations here. The trills are actually quite loud, where the sustain is quite soft. So let's, I think, maybe try a different articulation. Let's just try, I think, staccato shorts. I think I actually did have that. I might have changed it back to a sustain. But I think if we listen here, I think I wanted that last note to sustain. And the same with this. Let's take a listen again. Cool, that's sounding better. And I think if we compare the two, against this articulation, the levels are sounding a bit more matched. So just check out the levels between different articulations when you switch them. And overall, I think the level of these woodwinds can come down quite a bit, maybe like 4 dB. You want them to sit a bit back. Maybe down to about 6. Bring it back up to about 5 dB. And also remember not to check your instruments in isolation. You want to unsolo elements to hear them against the other instruments. So just regularly check them against the rest of the mix. Now let's move on to the percussion. And I know that percussion is super important in this genre and it needs to sound big and loud. But against everything, if you listen to these percussion parts, it's actually pretty loud. So you can actually drop the percussion. You're still going to have that impact because the actual instruments are quite strong, but the volume doesn't need to be that loud. So this can come down to about 5 dB. Maybe bring it back up. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm listening to parts in isolation, maybe to each instrument, and then comparing it to the rest of the instruments. I might find that these metals, I want to drop them down. Maybe the snares as well, drop them. They can sit quite back. And then I'll compare it with the rest of the instruments. And then make some slight adjustments depending on what I hear. And also, what I've done is create some interest in the volume levels is I have added bits of automation across the arrangement just to change things up and make some elements jump out more than others at times during the arrangement. For example, like I already showed you, with the pad sound, when it comes in, the volume automates up and then automates it back down to give space for the rest of these instruments. And the same, it comes back in during that silence between the Brahms, drops out again, and then comes back up for the outro. And also, on some instruments, like these ambient pianos, the one piano I've panned left and the other right. So I have included some panning on my tracks just to balance them across the stereo field and give some interest to the listener. So that's my advice for you. Go through your different tracks, start adjusting their levels, add some automation in for some interest, and then if you need to, add some panning to your instruments to spread them across the stereo field just to give some interest to your track. Okay, so that was quite rough. Normally, I do spend a lot more time getting these levels right. I just rush through this for demonstration purposes, but it normally does take a lot longer than that, getting all the levels right. So just spend time getting those levels right and then proceed with adding some processing effects to your tracks. So next, let's take a look at gelling these sounds together with some EQ, reverb, and compression to really help this mix even more.